calling from, we welcome those right away since we never are quite sure what direction these calls will take. And we are streaming on YouTube. How fun. So welcome to all the YouTube people. We can't see your chat, of course, but we're glad you're here. And for the people rewatching or watching later, which we definitely have happen, welcome as well.
People from all over. We've got Maryland, Massachusetts, Missouri, Illinois, California, Austria, Nigeria, Montana, another California, Washington State, Massachusetts, and Austria, and Switzerland. That's cool. Got an international audience here today.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Canada. Give people another minute or so. I don't think I saw the it's starting now email, but they often come to me late. Did you see that one go out, Maren?
Yeah, I got it a couple minutes ago.
Cool.
Yes, so people are aware, and I don't know if I have any cards here. Do you, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I can. We fetch them.
It is the new moon in Pisces after all. Margot is not a Pisces moon, but she is a Pisces sun, so I'll let her do the cards today.
Okay. I can't remember if did you send these to me, Maren, or was that the other deck that you sent me? I know one of mine is from.
Yeah, I don't know that I sent them to you, but I think
you inspired me for sure.
Yeah, I got them, and I really do love that deck, so go for it. That's great.
Okay. Yeah, it's definitely my favorite.
Yeah, me too.
Like the colors, some of the colors. I can't do like the old timey looking ones with like the sad colors.
Yeah, and that deck just has such good energy. I agree. I don't love the the traditional tarot. I think it's a little dark for me, but anyways, the Light Seers deck is what we're talking about. Margot's gonna pull a card from there.
Okay. Oh, it's funny. I pulled the moon. People can see that. So the moon is number 18 in the major arcana. And we're of course here on the new moon.
Yeah, in Pisces.
It's in Pisces, yes. I'm a Pisces.
Yeah, this is what I shared when you went to get the cards. I said it was for you to do. Even though you're not a Pisces moon. Anyways.
All right, I'm just going to read this to you. I'm not as familiar with this card, actually. I don't know that I've ever even pulled it in this deck, but it says, when we're faced with uncertainty and illusion, it can feel like we are drowning. Trust that you will be okay, even if you can't seem to distinguish up from down right now. This feels very appropriate for our licensing conversation, I think. When you stop struggling to see that which you simply cannot see because it remains obscured behind shadows of the moonlight, you will experience a deep release that will allow you to float to the surface of your truth. The moon card asks you to go within, find comfort in the darkness, and to calmly listen to the whispers of your own intuition. There's divinity and magic here. And the mantra for this one is, I am safe, and I reach new levels of unconscious knowing as I surrender to the will of the universe. That's pretty right on.
Nice.
Meeting over, just kidding.
Yeah, that's all we got to say.
show you one more time. People want to see it or didn't get to already. Cool.
Yeah, I love that. And the moon also just being so feminine, right? In all of the ways. And having this discussion today in whatever way it comes out, but having the constructs of licensing at least be very masculine, as I think we'd all agree. So just kind of bringing our feminine essence into the discussion and not having it be so much about wrong or right, but, bringing what we each have to the table and seeing it from that perspective. So that seems like a really perfect card for this discussion today.
Totally. Well, should we maybe start with just like why this topic? Why are we talking about this? What's our point here?
Yeah. Sure. I will share a little bit. And many of you have heard the story, so bear with me for a couple of minutes. But I started as a midwifery student in Chicago, and licensing wasn't a thing there at all. So I got to experience an apprenticeship in that way, but also kind of the shadow part of that as well. So there's, possibly freedom, which we'll talk about. But then there's also the shadow side of midwives hiding and being underground and that kind of thing. So I was exposed to a lot of that right off the bat as a student before I really knew anything about politics or regulation or anything at all. And then I moved to Arizona, which was and is a mandatory licensing state for home birth midwives. And I got to see that side of the coin. I don't know how many sides there really are in this discussion, but this was a different side where the midwife I worked with was licensed, where she was happy to be. And I actively pursued getting a midwifery license in the state of Arizona, which took me many years and was a lot of paperwork and honestly a lot of hard work. And I didn't question it at that time either, because again, I didn't understand the history of licensing. I didn't see it as anything but good. And I think that's a common myth. We're safer. We can practice openly. And yes, there were really big differences between where I had been previously, but it wasn't all roses. And so I found that out for myself. After 2 years of being licensed in Arizona, I realized that ultimately that wasn't what my soul was calling me to do. And the way that manifested in the world was I was in a legal battle with the state of Arizona for several years, actually, over my license and acting outside of what was allowed by virtue of having a license. And I learned a ton. And if you want to read that whole story, that's in our book called Indie Birth, A Story of Radical Birth Love. It's on Amazon. Margot will probably post the link where you can read it for free as a download. And we love to share our book. There's lots of great stories in there. And of course, the licensing story is more detailed than I'm telling today, but it is the backbone of Indie Birth, essentially. And Margot has her own story to share. But for me, it was just realizing that for me, licensing and regulation didn't serve the kind of midwife I wanted to be. I saw that it didn't really serve my community. And so I gave my license back to the state of Arizona in 2012. And then I practiced there openly as a midwife without a license for 10 years. And I can talk more about that. So, Margot and I both have direct experience with this whole topic. And we've not only thought long and hard about it, but we've taught it and read it and lived it. And, our point today isn't necessarily to say, don't go that route, but I wish, in a sense, I had my eyes more open, although it happened perfectly. And I really have no regrets because it taught me firsthand how licensing limits choices for parents. And that's ultimately what I care about. I always say, the midwives are going to do what they do. They think maybe it's safe or it's not safe. We've got all these myths around not being licensed, and that's a mess. And maybe we'll hit some of those things today. But ultimately, licensing, mandatory licensing, no matter where you live in the world, will restrict choices for women. It will shrink the box of home birth. And, there's lots of discussions in there. Is it really better? Is it really safer? So a lot of things come up, and it's something we talk a lot about our students with as well. Again, not to convince them, but because there is this shadow side of all of it. And, being a good girl and feeling like we have to conform and being scared of persecution, being scared of prosecution, all of these things are tied into licensing. And most midwives, if they have a license, or even if they don't, perhaps have, gone a little bit deep with some of these topics. Although I think a lot of them are still really in the subconscious. A lot of midwives don't realize that they are super scared, even with a license, and, so blah, blah, blah. But I'll stop there.
Yeah. And I guess as I was thinking about today and this topic, and asking myself, like, okay, why this topic? Why does this feel like such an important topic? Always, if you were saying, Marion, it's kind of like the backbone of the work we do. It's something that really sets us apart as far as like the other midwifery, what was the word I'm looking for? Leaders out there in the world. And for some, it seems to me that if we could solve this problem, it would solve so many of the other problems, if that makes sense. Like, this is at the root of what is wrong with the way midwifery looks right now and the way the birth looks in the world. Like, this is where we started to go wrong, or one of the major places we started to go wrong was through licensing, controlling midwives, and by extension, controlling women and mothers. And so we all the time get messages from people who want to be a midwife, and they say, I want to be a midwife, but I don't want a license. And like, I don't know how to do it this way. I don't know how to go forward. And so I think, like I was saying a moment ago, if we were to solve, like if overnight we could, wave our magic wand and poof, licensing wasn't a thing anymore, there would be an enormous influx of women coming into this work that were previously scared, right? Like, there would be a huge influx of women who were ready to do, if that was off the table as a concern, as an obstacle. And overnight, we would also have a huge amount of access, way more access for women who previously had been told they're not allowed to birth at home, right? And so this is one of the keys to changing things, whether it's and there's like the more masculine pieces of this, like, lobbying, or like, we could talk about Hawaii. Somebody asked about Hawaii, getting laws changed, that sort of thing. But then there's also the more feminine piece of like, we have to just stop buying in, and we just have to like stop giving them this power, over us, because it's what is one of the main contributing factors in terms of what's wrong with the way birth looks right now. So, I just wanted to start, I guess, with that, just saying like, that's why this is important, before we get into the weeds more, perhaps, with like what to do and how to do it and all of that. Like, why is this important? I think is a really good conversation to be having. And hopefully that was clear. Why do I say what, Autumn? You can chat or type in the chat if you want to.
Even if licensing went away tomorrow, though, it doesn't change the fact that there is a lot of fear, in a sense, of acting in this role of midwife, and sometimes even as doula, or whatever the heck word you're going to use.
That is true.
And, that goes back probably for as long as we could see in history, or if you think past lives are a thing. Many of us have done this work in other lives and were burned for it, or whatever. So there's this deep need for acceptance sometimes. And I think licensing is the external validation of that. A lot of women feeling like, oh, well, I have this license now, and like the doctors will accept me and the medical world will accept me. And unfortunately, that's not true in many places. It doesn't really change things. So I guess what I'm saying is, yes, there's the external to look at and how do we do it and how do we work in it. But then there's really this internal landscape that we all have to deal with around these, deeper topics like I said, being fearful, being persecuted, being blamed, all of these things come with being a midwife, whether you're licensed or not.
Sorry, my internet was wonky there for a second. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And as I was saying that, I had that like sort of undercurrent of thought too, of like, if licensing was gone, we'd still have all of like the imposter syndrome to deal with,
Sure.
even without it. Like, it's not the be all end all solution, but this conversation seems to be like at the core to me of what is keeping a lot of people from moving forward, even if it's not actually the thing. Like they think it's the thing, maybe, even if it's underneath not. And Autumn asked why we were saying, that license, or that I was saying licensing is the beginning of the bad we see in midwifery. And then we have an entire 6-week course called Midwifery History that's part of our Indie Birth Midwifery School. So I can't sum it up quickly, but essentially, if we look back through history, we can see that licensing of midwives was very overt. Like there's clear evidence, like no one was shy about it, that the practice of licensing midwives was to reduce the amount of midwives and reduce the competition for doctors as they became the people. They wanted to replace midwives as the people who were there for births, right? And so in order to do that, they had to make there be less midwives and discredit midwives. And, licensing was the beginning of the end of autonomous midwifery, and it greatly reduced the number of midwives across, the westernized world, where licensing does exist, and now into other parts of the world as well. So it's pretty clear and obvious if you kind of look back at the timeline. And there's some really cool examples of, testimony and stories of women who resisted licensing really early on, like a long time ago, like over 100 years ago, because they could see what it was really about. And like I said, in a lot of places, they weren't even trying to be discreet. They were like, we're going to license midwives because we want to get rid of you. Like, if we say you have to have a license and we're in control of who has a license, then right, we'll just eventually have there be zero, or we'll make so many hoops that nobody jumps through them. Or the people that do are so like such sheep that we have complete and total control of them, so it is, I think it's a pretty clear cut, like licensing equaled, the end of autonomous midwifery. Although hopefully not forever, right? Like we're hoping there's this resurgence that we're a part of.
Right. And then progression through history to a point recently where we actually have women and midwives fighting for licensing.
Right.
Because it's like we're so far past the point of realizing where it came from and what the point was that, in many states, there's entire groups of women, and I'm sure they're well-meaning and they don't really understand, and their feeling is, oh, this will protect us, and then of course there's the shadow side of this as well, where it's the sister wound big time, and it's all about, you can only be the kind of midwife I am, and anybody else is unacceptable or bad or stupid or dangerous. So it's become quite the complicated matter, and certainly isn't only, the patriarchy or the medicalized world against midwives. It's midwives fighting midwives. It's a fucking mess. So the other thing is we have a course called the Beginner's Guide to Radical Midwifery, and that's a pay what you can course. So really, for anyone here today that is a little interested, even just a little bit, donate what you can and dive in and learn the history and, hear more about different perspectives and how we got to where we are in different places. Because this isn't us like trying to brainwash anyone. There's a lot to understand. There's a lot of history, which is why, people come to us when they want to talk about this. I'm going to make a video, I think, for the midwives in Nevada who are always up against potential licensing. And so, they just want support, and they asked me to talk and tell my story and explain, explain in very simple terms how midwives and licensing don't go together for optimum sovereignty and autonomy. Those two things just don't go together. So, it's an honor in a way for Margot and I to be educating as best we can, but it's complex.
I did post the link over in the chat for the Beginner's Guide to Radical Midwifery mini course. It's indiebirthmidwiferyschool.org/radical midwifery. If you're watching on YouTube, we'll try and add it there, or you can just give it a quick Google, Beginner's Guide to Radical Midwifery Indie Birth. And I would encourage you, wherever you are in the world, like we have people from all over, to just do a little bit of research online and find out, like, what is the history of licensure, midwifery licensure where you live? Like, when did it happen? And like, what was midwifery like before that? And what's it like now? And just, see for yourself, because there's a lot of really, really interesting stuff, pretty accessible if you give it a gander. Got some questions over here. Where do you want to start with those, or do we want to say more of our own stuff?
I know, I'm feeling like there's so many things to potentially talk about. I
think this one would be a good one to talk about first. Like, how does or doesn't licensing protect the midwife or the client, for those who believe a license would give an upper hand?
Right. So again, licensing isn't a unique situation in midwifery, right? Like, lots of professions license people. And I think that's even fascinating to think about, right? Like, if you're going to get someone to build your house, like, do you want a licensed person or not? And most people are automatically like, oh yeah, they have to be licensed. And maybe that's true for building a house, right? So in other words, like, no matter what the industry is, like, whose responsibility is it to spell out what their experience is? And you as the consumer, like, what does that mean to you? So I don't know about you, but if I was looking for someone to do that, for example, and my neighbor had this really big, beautiful house that they had just had built by someone, I'd want their name. I really wouldn't care if they had a piece of paper, but that's me. So we've kind of lost touch with the ways that we interact with our community, and like, who knows what, and, stories about this person or that person. We just think that it's a transaction. And I think that's really troublesome in birth, for example. Because there are women out there that maybe are like, well, I have to have a licensed midwife because that guarantees me of something. And I think that's a really nuanced discussion. Like, yes, experience is important if you're a midwife. And again, this is when we talk about transparency or being honest. Like, do we really need a piece of paper to be able to understand what someone's experience is? And with such an intimate relationship that you would potentially develop with a midwife, wouldn't there be other questions that were maybe more important? Because again, what does a license mean? It means that they paid money to somewhere and maybe took some kind of test, which usually is pretty basic or entry level, and midwifery is no different, and then has the piece of paper on their wall that they paid for. So that's what it is. And there's lots of midwives, of course, that have been practicing for 30, 40 years that are amazing and maybe choose not to pay or don't want to take the test. So it's just so much more complicated. But I think we live in a time, of course, where people are into transaction, they don't really think about it. So again, it's like, well, if I want a home birth, then I should hire this person. And that means that I'll have the birth I want, for example. Not necessarily true. A licensed midwife could be horrible or have no experience, really. So we're not asking good questions. And my experience has been over the 10, 12 years of not being licensed that no one actually cares because, Margot and I are unique in the sense of like, we have tons of podcasts out there. We have articles. We're doing things like this. So I'm an open book. Ask me whatever question you want. And people either want the kind of midwifery that I'm offering or they don't. And licensing doesn't even factor into the discussion anymore. So I think it's an entry point for learning about midwifery. But most communities, if they have a midwife that's been in the community, like her reputation and those kind of things really are more important. We've just forgotten that. And again, it's this like really black and white thing. So I don't know. I threw a lot in there. I don't even know exactly what I said, but I mean it. I mean it either way.
I'm just posting a couple of links over here to some of our.
Yeah, save them for me for later,
yeah,
please.
I
Okay.
am. I'm making a little notey note. Yeah, okay. So someone, oh man, yeah, there's just so much. And so we talked like a lot about this at our answering the call to radical midwifery weekend retreat, which we don't have one like booked at the moment. Like we don't have a date for the next upcoming one, but if and when we offer that again, if this is something that you're really trying to work through, like that would be a great place to come really dive deep for a couple of days on all of this with us. Let's see. What do I want to say to that? Like, there's so many other things. Just to like quickly squash a couple of the myths that I'm kind of seeing pop up over here. I'm an unlicensed midwife, and it's extremely easy for me to access hemorrhage drugs. So just putting that out there,
Likewise.
like I got all the Cytotec I could ever want for like many lifetimes. Same with Pitocin. So that is like so not a thing, not a problem in my experience. Not to say like it wouldn't be at some point, but that is if that's what's holding you back, you can just cross that one off the list. And then I saw this up here too, like the ability to take insurance. And so this gets into the money stuff, and like you have a whole podcast on this, right, Maren? I could post the link for that as well. I think insurance has absolutely no place in home birth midwifery care because we are not, it's not medical. And as soon as we start being in bed with insurance companies, like there's just a whole nother terrible layer of control and scrutiny and grossness. Like if anyone here likes insurance companies, you're in the wrong place. Like no, I don't know anyone, even mainstream people who are like, oh man, insurance companies are so great, like and benevolent, like they're the devil, they're terrible. And so I don't know why anyone would ever want to take insurance. I have, and Maren, same goes for you. If you want to speak to it yourself, you're welcome to, but neither of us have ever turned someone away because they couldn't pay. And so that is like not an excuse to get licensed. The people who do that, in my experience, the midwives who are like, oh, I'm going to get licensed so I can take insurance, and that way I can take the state insurance and help low income women. Those women are often like the most savior mentality, biggest ego midwives I've ever met. They're like, I'm going to save all the poor women. And it's going to be great. And so there is one local to me who's totally like that. She, like, that's kind of her whole shtick. And she's actually becoming a nurse midwife so she can work in the hospital now, as last I heard, because she is having such weird and terrible experiences with people who don't value her enough to pay her in money. Right. So not that that's always the case or a black and white issue, but I have no interest in ever taking insurance. Just putting that out there, that is not something you need to be able to do to have a thriving, abundant midwifery business. And so I don't want to get into the money thing because that's my other hat that I've had recently. I'm now also a money coach because largely of this work, and seeing all the weird money stuff that midwives and women have, but just wanted to put that out there too, that insurance is not a thing you need to be dealing with. And if you think you do, that's fine, but I would disagree. That was a big rant. I thought it was going to be like a 2-sentence rant. Sorry.
Yeah, and it's a system of death and destruction. So I personally wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole anyways. That's a whole other thing.
Yeah. Do you want to say any more about this, like sister wound, licensed midwife reporting people? Like people, it sounds like there's a number of people in here who are like more worried about other midwives than necessarily like parents or the state. That's like a hot steaming pile of doo-doo to put in your lap there. Sorry.
Thanks, Margo. Sure, the sister wound is real, and so if you don't know what that is, it's just the way women are basically taught to hate other women and all of that nonsense. So I just don't have a lot of patience for it. I just don't play that. I don't play into that. I don't play that game. I don't care. Like, and I think for me, the attitude is like, we're each here to do what we're doing. And a licensed midwife, for example, I don't have a problem with. She is free to offer what she offers. I'm not trying to change anyone else. And I don't even feel like I'm offering the same thing. So you really have to try your best to get out of this, like, us against them thing. Like, if you're not doing licensed midwifery, chances are you're not doing licensed midwifery. It's a very specific kind of midwifery. And yes, it's kind of like the dominant midwifery, which is why Margo and I bust our ass every single day trying to change that. We have a new program for midwives coming up called Elevate. And that's the whole point. Come all CNMs, come all licensed midwives. We love you. And we want to help you shift your practice for your own soul, because the truth is medicalized midwifery, licensed midwifery is killing a lot of midwives. It's killing them. They're not loving it. It's hard. It's rough. All the things we're talking about, right? So just think about that for a minute. Like, these are very scared women often who feel that this license is their do or die. And you're not going to change that for them either. So you really just have to figure out what you're offering in a way that feels great for you and not give a fuck what anyone else is doing, because why? I mean, just why concern yourself with that? There's plenty of women out there that are wanting, what we offer. So that's my focus, is the women, and not concerning myself with the midwives. But not, I'm not entering into some kind of debate with them or trying to prove I'm better. I don't really care. They can do what they do, and I will do what I do. So, live and let live.
Totally. I'm just copying these links over for us. And trying to post this one about insurance stuff. Yeah. What I wanted to say is, you were saying that, just feeling like that's kind of the dominant form of midwifery right now. Like, that's true. And I'll say the simple version of this. I think I've talked about it a lot other places, but there's not that many midwives in the United States. It's like somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 home birth midwives. And we got as many of their email addresses as we possibly could last summer and sent them all just some information and tried to collect info about who would be willing to precept for our students and that sort of thing. And anyways, my point is, 1,000 more midwives like this, and we would be the dominant version of midwifery, so it's not really like a huge amount of shift that would need to happen to make a huge shift. Oh dear, I've got a visitor.
Yeah, I mean, I see your comments, Brittany, and you're talking about, just really being, I'm sure, hurt by the fact that there is this sister wound. I totally feel you on that. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm just saying that all we can do is be responsible for ourselves. And this is not a popular belief. I've been through investigation, I've been through it. and it was my thing. So we can't blame it on other people, even if it looks that way, even if it looks that way in the world, that these people are doing this thing to me. No, this is your journey and this is where you're being led. And if you're able to move through it and find your power, that's great. And that's probably really beneficial. And I think that's what we're all here to do, because, any of us at any time, licensed or not, can have stones thrown. So are we going to pay attention to the stones that are being thrown? If we do have to pay attention, then that's the lesson. So it's not like you're going to find some magical way to protect yourself, whether you're licensed or not. That's not the world we live in. You have to find it inside, right? We have to find what we need to feel safe inside our bodies and inside of ourselves. It's not, that's not a popular thing to talk about. But that's how I feel anyway. Otherwise, we're just constantly blaming someone. Oh, it's the hospital. Oh, it's the doctors. Oh, it's the midwives. That's not the way I want to live anyways. Yeah. Catch the stone and, as my mentor would say, pick it up, read the bottom of it, take the lesson and shift internally. Like, that's why we're all here, if we're kind of walking this path of attempting to change the world we live in, because that's the highest aspect of this conversation, is that we are all sovereign beings. We are all free. We are all supposed to be free to be on the highest level. So, you have to remember, when you're feeling boxed in, which is normal, right? Like, that's the human perception of, like, we're boxed in and we can't and we won't and we shouldn't. But at the highest level, we're free beings. And I think we really do have to remember that. But yeah, they're hard conversations for sure. I don't think anyone has the answer. And, there's also just the whole topic of transparency, whether you're licensed or not. Like, what are we sharing with people that come our way? I know when I was licensed, I didn't even have the clarity of vision to see that I was restrained in my own practice, right? Before I went into this legal battle with the state, it's not like every woman that came to me, I disclosed, oh, I'm licensed. And so this means, if you get to 42 weeks or if you have a breech baby or whatever, that I can't help you. I wasn't like telling people that, because I hadn't lived it yet. I didn't kind of know that it was a thing. So, what's my point? I mean, even with not being licensed, I think we owe it to people, licensed or not, to be really honest about our experience. And so that's one of the, the pleas for licensing, is like, we can't have women out there who aren't really midwives doing this. And on one hand, I agree. I don't know where people sort of get that initiative to start practicing midwifery when they haven't learned midwifery. That's horrifying. However, no matter what, we all owe it to be transparent to the women that come our way and say to them, hey, you know what? I didn't do midwifery school and I've only seen 10 births and this is how they went. Like, if you're honest, then we trust the women to choose. This isn't about policing each other. But I don't think there's as much transparency in the world in general. And sometimes those are licensed midwives not being honest. And sometimes it's birth keepers. And it's on both sides of the fence of people not really being honest about what they offer. And then stuff starts happening in communities.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Shall I bust another myth?
Oh, please.
Okay, maybe not so much a myth, but someone up here asked about like transporting and collaborating with doctors and like how you manage stuff. So I just want to paint a little bit of a picture. So I'm an unlicensed midwife in Minnesota. It is actually explicitly legal here at the moment to be unlicensed. So licensure is voluntary in Minnesota as it is in Utah, which is pretty unique law as far as laws go. Do I think that like grants me some magical protection? Not really. No, like, when I've had outcomes that were less than ideal, I certainly have stayed awake nights sweating, wondering if I was going to get called and, you know, have someone knock on my door. That's so I guess just wanting to put that out there that doesn't, there just reiterating what Maren had already said, which is that there's no perfect situation or solution or protection when you are a human being who is alive in general, but especially as a midwife, right? So anyways, I live in Minnesota. I'm unlicensed. I was the first unlicensed midwife here in my city. And I'm not the only one now. I have a student who's now an unlicensed midwife as well. And I actually prefer the term license free. I'm free of a license. I don't have one restricting me, which is so cool. And I have a great relationship with the hospital. And so I've had to transport a number of women there for all manner of issues that have come up. And they apparently have a pretty good, have positive regard for me, according to the nurses that work there that have talked to me. They're like, oh, when we see that you're coming in with someone, we usually feel pretty good about that and are, glad it's you and not one of maybe the other midwives who often come in with less ideal situations. And all the other midwives are licensed. So just putting it out there that I don't have a license. And even without one, I've got a fine relationship with the hospital. I have all the tools that I could possibly want and need at home. And when I go in and need to go in, I can get what I need for my clients, and my clients can be treated respectfully. And it's a really fantastic setup. And I don't think it's a coincidence, but I think it's the result of a lot of things, some dash of luck for sure. But also just the way that I have approached them when I do need something, because we only go when we need something, and when we need something, we're grateful that they can then help us with that. And so I think just communication skills and being able to manage your own energy in a way that feels, what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, just like being able to talk to other people and cut through some of the institutional garbage, and also through these like tropes of like, oh, doctors versus midwives. Like, I don't ever approach it with that expectation. I go in expecting that they will be helpful and kind and respect me, and vice versa. And so far, so good on that front for myself.
Yeah, I'm not sure where that myth really came from. And maybe that it is more true. Maybe that feels more true in some places, but I've had the same experience as a midwife without a license. I've had actually better relationships
Totally.
and an easier time. And I mean, I have a collaborative OB. Like, I have all kinds of resources that when I was licensed, I didn't have. And ironically, when I was licensed, that's when I had the hardest time. And that's when the hospital reported me for every little thing that,
I witnessed.
There.
That's when I witnessed an obstetrician like screaming at you. Yeah. So it's like the license does not protect you from that. And they don't care if you're licensed or not. Like, that is the truth. Like, they don't even understand. They don't even understand the different ways that someone can become a midwife. Like, they're not concerned. Like, most OBs don't care. So if you show up with a client and you say you're a midwife, they think all midwives are the same. So if they've had terrible experiences with midwives or already thought they were all crazy, having a license isn't going to change that. And not having a license is not going to change that. So just putting it out there.
Yeah, like to that end, I think we sometimes do make more of it in our own minds, our own psyches, our own insecurities, this whole topic. And, I know that's easier to say once you've been doing this for a long time, but maybe that gives people encouragement in a way. If you are just starting out, or if you're a new student or whatever, it's easy to become obsessed with this. Like, oh, I'm not going to have a license. I'll never find anyone. I'll never find anyone to pre-sub with. Because you already feel like an outsider. Like, you've already made yourself the black sheep. And on some level, I think it can feel necessary to walk through that. Like, I've walked through that, but it doesn't really serve you in a way to just feel like such a weirdo. Like, you're not. You're just someone that is choosing not to do that. There are plenty of women that want this kind of care. You make a community of these people and you proceed. And it's not like I think about it. I don't think about this hardly ever, which again, I know, that's due to experience. But in other words, like don't make more out of it than it is in a way. If your soul is calling you to be a midwife in the way that Margot and I teach and that resonates with you, like get on the train and you'll have a long journey of your own experience and your own apprenticeship and you'll figure out what's true for you. It's like you don't have to like go crazy with it at the very
Yeah.
first step.
Yeah, you don't have to have it all figured out. There's definitely like baby steps along the way. I have a post that I'll share in the chat too, about sort of how that process looked a little bit for me, even when I was just starting out here. Again, even with it being explicitly legal, there was this like, there's this ingrained fear that's part of the collective consciousness around like doing something that's outside of the norm. And I had to really work through that, especially in the first year or two of me practicing here. And, this mantra of like, I'm not doing anything wrong. Like I wasn't lying to anyone. I was being honest. I had done 5 years of study. I was ready. And I still had this like, but I did it anyway. And I'm so grateful because like same Marin, like I almost never think about this anymore. It's just like who I am. It feels really normal. It doesn't feel like this big, huge thing anymore. And I just wanted to point out, so totally not trying to call you out, Hannah, but I see your comment over here. That's amazing. In England, there's no way you could be unlicensed. And I think it should be an option. I mean, we know people who are unlicensed in England. So there is a way, people are doing it. And I think it's just really important anytime that we're in this like always never thinking, it's really important that we check ourselves and be like, is this true? Is it true that there's no way at all? Because then we start really limiting ourselves in so many ways in terms of our creativity. Even if there's no way for you to do it, or if it feels like there's no way, it's worth, if again, like Mary said, if your soul's calling you to do this work in this way, it's worth pursuing like the what ifs and exploring the rabbit holes and trying to find a way that you can do the thing that you've been put on earth to do in a way that feels good and right to you. And I've often said this, just that if all of a sudden licensure was mandatory here and I was scared or something, which I don't think would happen, but if overnight I was like, oh no, licensure is mandatory and now I'm terrified, I would either quit doing it or, become a doctor or something. I don't know, like, but there's no way that I could sign on to be a licensed midwife and do all the things that come with that. And I have so many like weird, icky stories I could tell you. Even as an unlicensed midwife, I was able to sign birth certificates here in Minnesota. And even as an unlicensed midwife, I could do that. And I'm not doing that anymore. And one of the reasons is just like, once you do that, the state thinks you're their little like agent. They're sending you things about why you didn't do the hearing screen on these kids. Or I had a client who, this is really creepy. Her husband is like a government employee and had, tested positive for COVID and was out of work for 2 weeks. At some point during her pregnancy, somehow they like put all these records together and noticed somehow that she was pregnant at that same time. And they reached out to me because they wanted me to give them her records, and wanted to know if she had had COVID too, because her husband had had it while she was pregnant. And they were doing studies on, women who had COVID during their pregnancy. Oh, yeah. And so of course this client was like, no, do not give them my information. And I was like, the only reason they knew to contact me was because I helped her file the birth certificate. So I'm like, I will not do that anymore. Anyways, I'm not sure what my point was, other than to say there's no way I could sign on to be a licensed midwife and like literally sign on the line saying like, oh yeah, I'm a minion of yours now. Like, not doing it. And I'll just, this is often like a thing I say after that conversation and someone asked this question, like, what about when it's illegal in the state? I also don't think about it when I cross state lines. Like if I were to go to a state where licensure is mandatory, which I've done many times, I just don't think about it anymore. If I'm being totally honest, like I just, it's not the way I want to live my life. And there's also the piece of like, we can't control everything. And so I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. It's like, I didn't always feel that way, but that is how I feel now. And so if you don't feel that way, it doesn't mean you won't someday. Do you want to say more about PMAs though, Maren, since that I feel like it's probably on a lot of people's minds?
Oh man.
I know. I make you talk about it because.
Well, maybe we could just post the couple links we have to Jason's. I don't know if you have Jason's class. Yeah. And I have a couple podcasts about it, and it's in the Indie Birth book. And
what's his class?
Which
link are you thinking?
Somewhere.
Like on his site?
Yeah, I don't know if you're gonna find it, but yeah, that's what it's called. Yeah, I don't know what to say. I mean, a PMA or a private membership association is definitely becoming more popular, and so most people have heard that term and maybe know what it means. But I discovered that for myself, whatever it was, 10 years ago, as a way that felt like a solution for me to not have a license. So it's been a long journey, as I said. And I'm also not, there's a lot to talk about that we don't have time for. It's a lot of like more in-depth work within yourself. And again, this idea of sovereignty. So, is there a lawful kind of structure that might protect us in a way? And I think the answer is yes or no, depending on where you are in your own process. So a PMA could be an option for people of any profession, really, that do things with people. So doctors or body workers or whatever, even doulas. And the idea is that it creates a private contract between people. So the clients that I work with sign a PMA agreement, and they're very clear that I'm not licensed. Again, transparency is most important. And they understand that, like the public law, the public midwifery laws don't apply to us when we're in private contract with each other. So the easiest way to visualize it or to know what I'm talking about, maybe in your own community, there's some kind of like herd share or farm share, right? So raw milk is another way that sometimes people use PMAs so that they can buy and sell raw milk in states where it's illegal. It's essentially the same thing, but it's not like we're saying that protects the be all and end all of the worst case scenario. You really can't approach it like that. It's not like a magic band-aid. It's really just part of a bigger process. And it's part of a bigger process of untangling yourself potentially from the matrix and finding your sovereignty. So Margot has posted my husband Jason's class there, Sovereign Business. It's a PCA 101 class, and that is, I believe, a donation-based class that he offers. So you can donate and watch that, and you'll learn a lot more than I can tell you right now.
What else as we are coming to the end of our hour? I guess I just want to say this often brings up a lot for people. And like, if I put myself back at the start of my journey, I could totally see listening to something like this and being like frustrated, being like, they don't get it. Like, but where I live, it's different and it's the worst. And there's no way I can do it. Like, I could totally see myself having a temper tantrum about it. Oh, Arrow, what is it? Sorry.
I'm hungry.
He's
for
hungry.
dinner.
He's hungry for dinner. It's 2 p.m., everybody. He's hungry for dinner. I just fed him 2 hot dogs. I'll let you take that from there for a second, Marin, while I put him out.
Well, we're pretty good at mind reading each other, but I don't know exactly what she was going to say there. But I can relate to that. Yeah, I'm sure it seems a little frustrating. I'm sure a lot of people are like, oh, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, this happened to me. And all I can say is we're all in it together in the biggest collective sense. And like, do you want to live in a world where your daughters are asking for permission to birth how they want? Like, you have to get big picture about it to get fired up. Like, is that okay with you? Is this not okay with me? And if my life is about that, then my life is worth something in a sense, like for the collective. So if that gets you fired up, if that helps you understand, that's kind of one way to look at it, is like, what are we doing here? Are we just going to ask for permission for the rest of our fucking lives and just do what we're told when we're doing good work? Right? No, the answer
Heck
for me
no.
is no. Heck no. So I don't know. That's the big picture perspective. And then, like we've said, kind of like the little picture perspective is like, we each have to do our own work. Yes, we're in this together. Yes, it's the collective. The world is shifting. The old is leaving. All of this is true. Get fired up about it and then do your own work. And if you're afraid, then you deal with that. And if you have that feeling of being persecuted or someone's always coming for you, like, deal with it. That's not going to go away, whether you choose midwifery or not. So we have both things happening, the big picture and then the individual work we're all doing to just be better humans.
Maybe a slow clap.
Well, really, like, find some reason to care about more than yourself in a way, right? Like, yes, you're important. Yes, you being a midwife could change the world, but like, what is actually important to you with this topic? What is actually calling you to be a midwife? And focus on that on your bad days, because that's the truth, right? In these bodies anyway, none of us are here that long. So we make the impact we can make and call it good and hope we don't have to repeat it in the next lifetime. That's what I think.
Well, shall we wrap up?
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's any like announcements. So we have our Elevate program coming up in March for practicing midwives. I don't know that a lot of I don't know that a lot of practicing midwives are here right now, but that's okay, because I bet you all know a midwife or two, and maybe some of what we've shared today feels like, oh my gosh, so and so would love to be in this community. Whatever it is, share the Elevate link, and we're going to help these midwives become even better at what they do and become even more clear. And that isn't about licensing per se, although that might be some of it for some of them. And let's see, otherwise we do these new and full moon chats. So every 2 weeks you can catch us here, different times, different days, different topics. But if you're on our social, which is a great place to join just for free, if you want to see more of us or be part of the Indie Birth community, Margot will put the link. It's social.indiebirth.org for those on YouTube. That's another great place to just get information about what we're up to, see what courses we have, and join the next moon circle, which will be on the full moon. And I do not know what the topic is at all right now, but that will be, I'm sure, revealed.
Can't remember it all
by our lovely assistants within the next week.
I also just wanted to put a plug in, if people are here and they're thinking about moving into midwifery and like there is fear or there's, apprehension or whatever, another option that a lot of people take is to become a doula first, which, especially in our world, maybe isn't always like the first thing people think of, because they're like, doula, like that's like thought of as this and in the mainstream realm, it is sort of like a wimpy sort of situation, but we have a really awesome doula training that you might really love. And so I posted a link for that as well, because that's another really fantastic way to get involved and be working with women and explore your love of birth, in a slightly less, like a lower pressure way. But again, all the same internal stuff is going to come up, but maybe in a slightly gentler fashion. What are any other announcements? I'm asking for my
Um, I don't know why you're cutting out for me. I don't know if it's me or you, but I see Vanessa's question about being in a meek school and all of that NARM stuff. You could email us, Vanessa, if you want to talk privately, support@indiebirth.org, and we'll try to help you out with more specifics for your situation. But the short answer is we think our school, of course, is really awesome in a lot of the ways that it teaches differently than the typical meek school. But I'll leave it there for today because that's a huge topic. But you can email us, anybody, support@indiebirth.org, if you have questions or you have, a personal situation you want to share. And probably Megan here, I don't know if she got off, but Megan here will get back to you and direct your inquiry in the correct way. Hello, she's still here. So feel free to email.
And I mean, I don't know your full situation, Vanessa, but just offhand, I would look at our Elevate program that's coming up next month, because that might be a really perfect fit for you as you sort of envision the way that you're wanting to actually put things into practice. And then we're also happy to, this isn't advertised publicly, but we're happy to put little packages together for people if they want to just take some of our courses a la carte. I would never recommend that for someone who hasn't, who's kind of like early on in their learning. But if there's just a couple of things that you want to add on after you've done the Elevate program and get a better sense of what maybe the gaps are from having done the Meek stuff, that would be an option too.
All right. We are so glad you hung out with us today to talk about this really crazy big topic. I hope it was at least somewhat illuminating and fun in the ways that it can be to talk about such a thing. But we look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks-ish. And like I said, to be determined, or you'll figure out what the topic is. But either way, have a great new moon and beautiful week, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Send me those links, Margot. I'll
Oh
post.
yeah.
Okay, bye.